welcome to another FaceTime show. And we thought we'd do something a little bit different this time. So, Byron, you found a video, didn't you, by Stuart Iron Gutsman McCowan, which is
I don't know whether he'd prefer
the Iron Gutsman,
or Stuart, but I was literally searching for a concept that I've been looking at, and I was thinking of Magakin at the time, which was, how is the book now? Not like how was it initially, but how is it now? The dust has settled, and he literally had one out. So we'll pop a link below to that, and this is kind of our version of one of those.
Yeah, and I think we talked about like doing follow-up shows, and we have on books and list texts and live shows where we discuss things like after the fact, like weeks or months down the line, and especially when we play those armies. And as we've both played Nurgle, and actually his video was on Nurgle, we thought we would actually do some content around that, because he did say that it's not enough content.
We're going to probably nerd out on this, right? Like,
so,
this is the proper nerding out show. Like,
we'd actually release our own content in that way. So do check his video out and give him a like and a sub, just to support him, because obviously
nice to see quality content out there. Like, you don't have to agree with the opinions someone's putting out. I think it's great, really, really good.
Yeah, so in these show series, what we're going to do is revisit Battle Tomes and talk about our opinion of what might have changed since we reviewed it, where we feel it fits, strengths, weaknesses, how good it is for beginners.
Had some reps.
Yeah,
it's been out in the wild for a bit.
Have we been seeing stuff on podiums and stuff like that? So it's kind of like a short and sweet, but should remain relevant because it's talking more about the book, internal balance and
we're going to be talking generally, not specific to the meta today. Like, not like this beats this current hotness, but in general it is resilient, or it does well at scenarios, or this is objectively its strength, that type of stuff.
So I guess we should just jump straight in, and obviously with Nurgle we're going to talk about the strengths and the weaknesses as we see them now. So we've both played Nurgle competitively. I've played against Nurgle a lot recently. I would say obviously the way that we sort of characterize their strengths is the resiliency of the army is probably the number one strength they have.
Oh, completely. Like the resiliency and therefore objective capturing power, if you can get there, and the ability to grind is absolutely where the strength of the armor is.
That's the weakness, isn't it? It's been being slow. But in terms of resilience, so what makes the resilience? Obviously got a 5-up ward save across the whole army. You've got a heal mechanic from your characters. You've got summoning, which allows you to replace units, and good armor on the mortal stuff, as well as a good ward. And I know people say a 4-up or a 3-up's not a good armor, but it is really when you've got all-out defense and you've got a 5-up after. It's a compounding thing. You've also got debuffs like blow ups -1 to hit, or like -1 to hit and shooting, AoE aura ability. You've got disgusting resilience to increase your plague bearer survivability.
Just vanilla -1 to hit. Anyway, all the way scattered throughout the army, sprinkled here and there. You've got, that unit's got a slightly better armor save on top of its ward, or it's got more wounds than people expect.
And you've got sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I still have to remind people multiple times in a game that yes, a Beast of Nurgle does have that many wounds. They're just little things that make a difference.
Yeah, and I think that the healing is massive because it gives you the ability to take some wounds, spike your saves, not die, and then if you double turn back or something, you're suddenly like, your character suddenly gains like 8 or 9 wounds from a heroic action and other things. So I would say that the resiliency is a combination of ward save, armor save, healing, summoning. So when we say resilient, we don't just mean
disgustingly resilient
one rule. It's a combination. And then also you've got things like the Bile Piper can't pile in, the wheel can't pile in, the 4-up ward on heroes on the wheel. I mean, we're not going to go
healing.
And we're not going to go through like every rule. We've done that on the book review, so you can go back and check that out. Obviously you can watch the Iron Gutsman video. He's a bit more detailed on specific rules, but we just sort of talk more generally. The army also has like normally quite a high wound count for AOS free armies. I found.
It does. And it doesn't matter which type. If you go hero heavy, it's still got a pretty high wound count by hero
Yeah.
heavy standards. If you go infantry heavy, it's got, it's always got a decent amount of wounds. Even if you start bringing allies in, somehow you end up with a decent amount of wounds. So
you're generally always over 100. I think it's very hard not to get over 100 wounds, but what you've really got to think about is effective wounds. So like
it's the quality of those wounds, isn't it?
Yeah. So you could increase your wounds by a third straight away, like, because basically you've got a 5-up ward, even if you don't think about armor.
Yeah.
And then also you've got to think about the wounds you can bring on with summoning, and also you've got the wounds you gain back from healing. So heroes are almost a force multiplier on that, because
completely,
more mechanics to heal heroes.
So effectively, you're just getting a load of multipliers. Let's say you start with 100 wounds. That could be 130 once you take into account after saves, once you take into account summoning, and then times that by the same multiplier. You're going to end up with what feels like 180, 200 wounds to your opponent by the time you've had turn 5, which is that's a decent amount for everyone, unless you're Beast of Chaos.
Yeah. And then that basically makes the army forgiving, right? Because it's resilient. So you can make a mistake,
well-roundedly resilient as well.
And some bits are not forgiving as well, but we'll talk about that. But I think the mortal wound, like tick damage, is particularly good because it's almost like passive damage.
Did someone hit you?
Yeah.
Cool. You can probably hit them back a bit.
It gets around a lot of stuff like good armor saves, and it goes out of sequence because it happens later in the turn. You've got other things to do mortals, like I find like the Great and Clean One belly flop is really good.
Yeah, it's really good.
Blow Ab spell is a game changer if you get it off.
One of the best spells in the game.
Yeah, and he's got an AoE mortal tick where you roll to see if they are -1 and they take damage, and then you could do mortals from wound rolls on demons using the Baal Piper tune and stuff like that. So for me, like, the mortal output is where you damage rather than your base attacks, unless you talk about monsters or heroes, because they actually are the ones that do the damage in combat.
Yeah, they're the ones that do the damage in the turn that you do the damage.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest of it, it's a patient army. We're going to touch on this a lot, but turns 4 and 5, that's when you've had 4 or 5 turns for your 3 or 4 mortals a turn to really have accumulated nicely.
Yeah, and in terms of weakness, like, I've put much on here. There's lots of stuff you could say, but I think really slow kind of sums up really their biggest weakness, and that's just they're not fast. So and we'll come on to missions later, but when you're talking about like having to get somewhere early, you're generally going to be trying to get people off rather than like being there.
Build your fort and slowly walk it towards your opponent, unless you're going a particular way.
And there are some ways around that, and I think the strongest competitive lists we see at the moment generally use like Drowned Men, Pascal, Blight Lords, and Lord of Afflictions to get around the slowness, or bridge, which is what I've run. I know Maudsley run that. So that's a way of getting your units where they need to be early. But then you're almost forced to take Master of Magic on a Great and Clean One because you need the reliability. You need Epidemus, so suddenly you're almost trying too hard to make those things relevant, whereas rather you're probably better off just taking the innate stuff.
It's not cheap either, is it?
No.
Like the Lord of Afflictions, he's useful. You look at it, what he does for his points, it's fine, but you still lost him and, potentially the points of the units that went with him, and they didn't start on the board. And you're not really very reliable on making those charges either. So maybe they don't make it in, your opponent gets priority, and they just move past them or something. You spend quite a lot, and if it doesn't work out, it can feel fairly bad with him.
Yeah, and the other thing is you're quite reactive. So, like, if you spread your army out to try and compete in multiple places, then your opponent's fast. They can pull you to bits, and you can't really get there. And also, I find that what I mean by reactive as well is, like, we talked about the disease mechanic. That's almost reactive of as a mechanic of them charging you or them staying in combat with you.
Did you end up in combat
and not dying?
It's not happening now. Yeah.
So if you die, you don't generate any disease. You didn't get to attack, so you didn't make it rolling dice, and they weren't there. You weren't stood next to the end of combat, so you didn't get disease points. So like units that can get blown through it early don't really do anything, and that's a problem. You kind of need that resilience to enact damage. So if you play against someone who's particularly good at doing lots of damage with no return,
you know, like
literally
impact
gonna
hits, things like that feel nasty.
Yeah.
Someone who can do damage out of sequence fast with multiple fast units.
Mhm.
Let's say they've got Stonehorn, Kragnos. That is scary.
Yeah.
As an army, you're gonna have to lean into Sloppity. He's very much required.
You really need to then be charging and using, like you say, like tail charging, using Sloppity to remove casualties in a clever way that means them moving free. They can't pile in.
Yep.
But then Kragnos is still hitting you, but it's not all of his attacks. It's
for that though, isn't he? Because the only things that you've really got convenient casualty removal on and that are going to lose enough models are Plague Bearers, and that is it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is super interesting. But anyway, so that's what we've got as our kind of like TLDR big kind of things. You might disagree, you might agree, I don't know, let us know. But so in terms of playstyle, they're kind of slow, tough, and grindy.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of obvious from what we've just said.
Like YOLOing at people and doing damage on your turns really fast.
Not for you.
Probably not you.
Yeah. It's rewarding of patient play.
Absolutely.
They do remind me boring. A lot of Death, because you can't. They kind of like that kind of grindy, like almost like OBR kind of style where
absolutely
although they do have options to do fast spike damage, and so did Nurgle do in a way. You do have stuff that is fast, but I don't think it hits hard enough.
No,
for you to really worry.
Not in comparison to other armies' options at all.
There is
not anywhere close.
Some things you can do in the army, like I think Maggot Lords and maybe even Glottkin countercharge and stuff like that is good, but it's not the same as Stormcast Dragons or Maw-Krusha or you know. There's loads of stuff in the game which is
don't get any of it for cheap.
No,
none of it will you lean into that. Like you're dividing the overall style of the army, and you might spend 800 points on the ability to do so, which is a lot.
Yeah. And we thought we'd do something because we did a series before. We talked about every faction at the start of AOS3, where we talked about like, you know, what are they like at a beginner? What's their background about? What's their like? What's the models like? So, are they a beginner friendly army for competitive play? Yes, definitely.
They're resilient
because they're forgiving. They're a bit admin heavy, so to get the most out of Nurgle, you really need to understand and lean into your mechanics like disease and your decision making is important, especially around deployment and where you move.
Your removal as well. My God, like you will get shafted, and I have been by removing the wrong dude. Like you'll lose a game on it, and I have.
And you know the sort of the tricks you need to know, like the piling tricks with the Sloppity, the summoning, making sure your tree's protected.
Don't forget what the next turn is with the wheel. That type of stuff.
Exactly. The wheel forward planning is massive. So like when I play against Nurgle with my IDK, because I've got the ability to change High Tide to 2 or 3, I'm always like, when is the can't pile in turn? Because I don't want that being High Tide.
I don't want to be striking first. I
don't really care if it's turn 2 or 3, because as long as the scenario's got a deep enough deployment, I'm not getting aggroed.
Yeah.
Because they're so slow, I can guarantee that I'm not fighting on the turn I don't want to fight. So again, it's a really good matchup, IDK versus Nurgle, and I think both people think it's a bad matchup.
Good game. Generally, if it's a balanced scenario, very good game. You can take with me when I've been playing it, I've been playing it quite a lot. I start off, I tell my opponent what the wheel is, and this is as much for me as it is for them. Like, this is the wheel, it's doing this. You don't care about next turn. That's bullshit. It doesn't matter. You do care about turn 3. It's this. And I've said that out loud to me as well as to them, and then that's on my mind. And I've done my duty. I've told them, I'm not going to be like, oh, gotcha. Here's some surprise rules. But also, I've reminded myself that turn 3 is a biggie.
I want to know every turn. I want to know each turn, so I write it down. So I know.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm fine with my opponent checking with me throughout the turns or whatever. But letting them know what's coming, like yourself.
Something like the 4-up ward on the heroes is massive. Not being able to do heroic action or use inspiring presence could be massive.
Yep. Even 2 extra summoning points,
massive.
like knowing you've got a chance of rolling a 4-up, and that is going to push you to dropping 3 drains down by 1 point or something. That's a really big deal.
Well, this is the bit I mentioned here, that they're admin heavy, because you need to keep track of disease. You need to keep track of remembering to tick them up, remembering to roll the dice, because it's really important to do that, because that's where most of your damage comes from.
There's not too many things, but you have to do them in multiple places.
Yes.
Like, disease, here, in the hero, sorry,
The
in
wheel.
the movement phase, and then this.
Contagion.
Here.
So, like, contagion's important. So as what I try to do when I play against Nurgle is I try and reduce their contagion, whether that's teleporting my aspect to the sea into their deployment zone and kicking their tree over after I turn it to a monster, or denying them getting into my territory by screening it off, make sure they can't get an easy unit in my territory. It drops 3 points off their total.
So big.
If you're in theirs, it's another one. If you've killed the tree, that's another one. There's 5 points they're not getting. That's a difference of them being able to summon something every turn or every other turn.
Yeah.
So actually, like, your disease, your contagion point management is important, and you've got to be thinking of that when you deploy, when you move. Because some missions, it's really easy to, like, you've got small territory, and you move your models out of your territory to enact the game, but you don't get any contagion in the next turn because you didn't leave something in your area, which is, and you don't generally have a lot of units to do that. And I know one of the
cheap ones.
No,
you need to be making use of your stuff where it's needed.
And I know one of the what I've seen is the good strats is to almost summon a cheap thing at the back of the table just to
summon
do
in
that.
your wake. You move forwards because you've got to get there.
Or something
because you're slow AF.
Off the base tree, which then gives you some protection around it, that kind of thing.
I've summoned the spoils box for Ravena because he's cheap, and I had that many points because I didn't want to miss out on it in the next turn, which feels a bit weird, but you get some options with Plague Bearers if you do it, so it is important.
He's 7 and Nurglin's at 8, so generally they're 2 things. I mean, Nurglin's, I got a better board presence, but Slopody's good. I generally like to summon a Sloppity near where I'm fighting because I'm running a lot of demon heavy, but if you're running mortals, then Nurglin's become probably better because the Sloppity doesn't do an awful lot for your army.
No, he doesn't.
Because it only affects demons, really. So
he only affects Plague Bearers. Sorry, Sloppity, Spoil Pox.
Yeah, so the Spoil Pox is just for Plague Bearers, but I don't see him being summoned very often. I've run him in my list as a starting hero to unlock Warlord and to give me access to give him an Arcane Tome and running the spell, and he's cheaper than the Spoil Pox, so it gave me more chance at a Triumph. So it's like, and I had a Plague Bearer in it. So
either the Triumph or not being 2005 points, which does happen.
Yeah. So they are beginner friendly. I think they're very forgiving. They're a bit admin heavy, and the mistakes that as a beginner you'll make is not being aggressive enough to get board position, not
forgetting your stuff.
Yeah, forgetting things, and not just not playing in turns ahead, and you need to in Nurgle.
Yeah. You either need to get your reps in if you're not a massively organized headed person, or if you are, like, if you have an accounting brain, you're probably going to be quite good with this army and you'll find it quite fulfilling. If you like the joy and the excitement of YOLO swagging something into something and bashing it, you could find the army boring, or you're going to have to build or ally your way into options to get that fast. Put in Bellicor because he's quick and he's a monster and he's fun, or something like that.
I find that the army works best when you play like Hammer Anvil. So like you have anvils, they hit your anvils, and then your Maggot Lords, your Great and Clean, when your hammers, and they go in and delete stuff. And that's generally the best way I found to be proactive with Nurgle in terms of damage output in the combat phase. Just as an aside. So a little bit of we talk about the perceived power. So when we did the show, and people talked in the comments, and people looked at the book and were a bit like, well, it's okay, can't really see what it does. It doesn't really have many high rend, it doesn't do much. The Plague Bearers are trash, they've got no armor save, they've lost the Cloud of Flies, beasts look rubbish, So obviously a lot of this is a load of trite, because once you play with the army, you realize that the allegiance is where the power is.
You can win games without killing anything. I went to an event, lost a single game, and my Great Unclean One didn't see combat once. Obviously, that's not necessarily a good thing, but I just existed in the right place really, really well. That was it.
Yeah, and that's why we've kind of put this damage bias, because when people look at stuff, it's the same when we did the Gargant show, right? People looked at their attacks and their cost, and they don't do enough damage, not going to kill anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like,
Game's
honestly,
not won on how many wounds did you do.
You can do battle tactics by just running things. They get bonuses. You know, you count as lots of models. The way that Maggot can play objective play and just outlast means that the damage output is not really as important as sustain and resilience, which is what
neither's your opponent's damage output. That's one of the nice things, right? You've got a well-rounded profile, a resilient one. So if someone's turned up with mortal wounds, you're a third better than most armies out there against that. If they turn up with, you know, a small amount of elite damage, you've got some healing, and you've got your mortals, like they stack up really well against a lot of matchups. So it's not necessarily about your ability to kill something at range. It's just the objective game.
No, and like they're outperforming what I think with people's expectations on release, and we've seen them on podiums. We've seen them in team events go like 5-0. You know, get like 100. I think Jack didn't drop a point, or drop maybe 1 or 2 points at Worlds with his Pascal list. I've seen them round the top tables. I've seen they won Carnage, you know, obviously piloted by good players, not taking anything away from them, not saying that the power's in the book, but I think when people saw the book, they thought it was probably sitting around a B tier book, and actually it's probably more AS.
No. And also, I think it plays exactly how it should, which I think is incredible, because the last one didn't.
No.
Fastest army in Chaos.
Well, I think that's why it was, because it was so different to the run and charge, +3 move bell, you know, Blades of Putrefaction, mortal wound, spike,
just on your army because of some stupid update. Should have never existed. Don't compare something to something that was obviously bent or was going to get FAQ'd or had its day in the sun that was over the top. Like, let's look at the rest of Warhammer.
Yeah, but I think it's a very different book to the old Maggot Killer book.
And it's like a Nurgle book now. Nice.
Yeah, and it plays like they should, but also it's very strong. So I've put a little note on internal balance, and I've put pretty bad on reflection, and mostly because of the heroes.
A third of the book, basically.
There's so many heroes that you just never ever consider. Don't really do anything. You know, you've got
3 different heroes that all have the same spell.
And I know someone's going to put a comment and say, oh, the Rockbringer Coven did really well at Adepticon, or, oh, yeah, I always take Gut Rot Spear. I'm not saying they don't get used. I just mean if you look generally at most lists, things like Gut Rot, Lord of Plagues, Lord of Blights, Rockbringer Sorcerer, the Pox Herald, they just don't see lists.
They're a bit behind. Doesn't mean you can't do well with them, or there isn't lists that would take them. Like, luckily, because of its inherent strength, nothing is awful in the book at all. But they're definitely behind the others.
And you could even put the Glotkin and Rotigus in those categories, although I think they're both very good. Yeah. But you don't see them very often. And I think the main reason for that is because of the points are so, like, on the main units, you need those units, and they're so heavy. I'm not saying they're undercosted, but it just means you just don't have the spare. No. And you almost go, well, I need to have my Lord of Afflictions, although that's debatable now. But I'd say, like, you need to have my LOA. I want to have a Wizard, a Great and Clean one. You've already spent like 1,000 points. Like, so you just don't have the spare points for these heroes.
The standard things that are in most lists start at 750 point for battle line covered by one, like a 20 block of Plague Bearers. 2 other things, doesn't matter what they are, they're going to be around 100 points each if you're trying to keep it low. If you do take the Lord of Afflictions for off-table deployment, then, you know, you add 220 to that, and you've gone 750 points in without even having a Wizard in the list, and stuff like that, or a unit to bring on the Lord
750 points. I mean, you're like, as soon as you've got an LOA and a unit of Pascals, that's already 440.
Once you add his, that's without the unit.
Oh,
yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, so, but I think, you know, even the units, I think as time goes on, Pascal Blight Lords are the clear winners in terms of unit. And I think because they're that multi-role in Drowned Men, you are fast in Drowned Men, pre-game move. They're the only unit that gets a pre-game move. then it makes you should take a Lord of Afflictions because
it encourages you into a lower drop army than general as well, doesn't it?
Yes, and it fits in the low drop, and then you're like, well, actually, out of the battle line, they are almost multi-role. They do mortals on the charge. They're better in the grind. They're faster. So you like, they pretty much tick every box that all the other battle line ticks in a slightly different way. So you could argue that Plague Bearers are like slightly more resilient with the magic, but then you need a Great and Clean one.
No mortals,
then you need a Scrivener.
Yeah.
Then you need, and you're spending so many points. And then you could argue that the beasts technically could do more mortals, but actually they're not as resilient and they're probably just as fast or not as fast.
Yeah.
But the problem with a beast is if you focus fire, there's less wounds before you're not doing a disease point. So they're actually easier to, because if you've got 2 Puskals or 4 Puskals and you kill 3, you've still 1 to give you disease. Whereas if you've got 3 individual beasts, you can kill 1 without touching the other 2. And then
you've got the option of rally as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
and those
like
things add up.
Yeah, and like then it means you're not even like keyed into sloppy summoning because you're like, well, actually, I don't care about that because I'm not a demon.
Yeah.
So you could use your summoning on different things, like Nurglings, and then you start thinking. So I just think you start really going into Puskal. I think Puskal spam is the best list.
Like I would agree, definitely.
And I would say that Putrid Blight Kings are probably the diamond in the rough.
Underused.
I think they are exceptionally good, and people just are not playing them because they look at the price tag. But I actually think
15 of those would be horrible.
I would rather have 10 of them than a Plague Bearer block.
I can see that. Yeah.
For lots of reasons. You can let me know below if you disagree or you think that they are good. I don't know.
See what happens another 6 months time. Like,
is it worth having a Great and Clean one and Blow-Ab, or do you just want 10 Blight Kings and Blow-Ab? Discuss.
Yeah.
Top units. We're kind of talking about it, but let's talk about it. So people might be a bit surprised at this list, some might not be. I don't know. So Puskal Blight Lords we've talked about. I just think they're great. I mean, they've got the more wounds on the charge. They're just great. I mean, like, look cool. Really good in the game. Lots of the competitive lists are just spamming these because they are doing everything. And I think you don't have the points spare to really buy anything else. You end up with if you end up with 110 points free, you could say, oh, I'll take Unit of Nurglings or I'll take a Beast. But if you've got a Lord of Affliction, you could take a single Puskal. So you just take that, right? So
tiny footprint. Yeah. Brilliant.
So they're really good. Lots of reasons. Great and Clean one, I think he's your toolbox hero all in one mega box. You've got your
He's the obvious choice.
He is, and like he's a monster, which is relevant right now and really good. But also he's resilient. He can do mortals on the charge. He's got a good shooting attack, 2 cast, 2 unbinds. Can reroll if you take Master of Magic, but Infestation and Nurgling is probably better for -1 to hit to give him more resilience. His healing Locus is really important in Nurgle, and it gives you access to that. So in one model, you get basically your caster, your combat, your big monster. But on, he is slow, but everything else about him is great. And I think
he's fairly easy to use as well. He's one thing to use well rather than multiple. The moment you divide him into other stuff, there's a little bit more risk, but I think there's more potential for reward. He's not a 1+, which people thought. People were down on him because he was expensive. Then they were up on him and he was in every list. I think you don't need anything out of the Nurgle book. Nothing is a 1+.
No, I would disagree. I think Maggot Lords are 1+.
Okay.
I think they're that good. Like I generally think the Maggot Lords are the best thing in the book. Blow-Ab is amazing for lots of reasons. -1 to cast, +1 to cast.
No denial.
Mortal Wound spell is just game changing if you get that off. His AoE debuff.
He's a bargain.
Good
too.
Combat. He's only 300 points. He's an absolute bargain. Yeah. Then you've got All Guts. He's a War Master. Gives you double protection, getting command points, which you do care about that if your general dies. He's also gives you a free command point every turn for efficiency. He does a lot of damage. They're not, I wouldn't say they're fast, but in the Nurgle book they're fast. Maybe not 8.
Yeah.
Morbidex is just like amazing resilience, especially if you summon Nurglings next to him, because you can
Summoning
basically
Nurgling is underrated.
you don't need to have the Nurglings on your list, and you don't need them to be, because he's a hero, so you can move up the board, then use your 8 points, to summon 3 Nurglings to give you the returner model into the base every turn from him. And he's obviously got he's very resilient. He heals half the wounds he takes. The only reason in those lists you take something like the Great and Clean one is because you want the Locust to get D3 wins back, not 1. Because that's such a game changer. I don't know if you could do that with Festus, but then he's expensive. So,
well, you can itemize him as well. He's customizable, right? The other
yes.
three unique, and him you can pick exactly what your loadout's going to be. So if you've got a list that really definitely wants to get spells off, you have Master of Magic, or you can do a damage build for him, or you can do.
Speaking of that, that's why the Lord of Reflections with a star is there, because his price tag and what he does in terms of his damage output is trash. But his command trait of, and the good thing about having Orguts in your list is he can be off the table and you still get your command point because you've got a general. So it's like you kind of get around that. But his
Rothgus, but less efficiently by a long way.
Overwhelming Stench on the command trait, which is the 7-inch can't issue if you're wholly within 7 can't receive, is so strong.
Yeah,
so strong. No Unleash Hell against that. You can't, because you can't issue it. You can't receive it.
Huge swing of risk reward as well. Like sometimes you'll risk that model and he won't quite die for a turn. You'll give away the priority and it'll be nuts.
Yeah, and you've got access to a 4-up ward. If you've got Epidemus, you can re-roll that. A 4-up re-rollable ward. He's just so strong, and that's why Gabe took advantage of that in his list, which I thought was really well crafted. So for me, like the Lord of Afflictions is almost, he gives you abilities to enact the board because you can put him off the table and he can drop down where he needs to be with units early, or you can wait, or he can be on the table. And I think really the best use for him is almost like pre-game moving in Drown Men, just having him as near your Puskull. So if they charge you, you go, well, you can't do all that attack.
Yeah.
You can't, you
very high quality babysitter and force what's around him.
And like I love the Lord of Afflictions. I think he's great. So like in my head, he's almost that tax you have to pay, but you always feel like he's overcosted, but then he does so much.
There's a real set of pluses and minuses with him, because if you make him the general, you can give him the incredible command trait, but then your general's not on the board, so maybe you need a War Master or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Also, he's an easier target than a Great Unclean one to kill. And part of how you win with the army is just by being like, well, you're probably not going to your opponent, you're probably not going to get some of the things you pick because you didn't kill a beast, even if it was battle line or stuff like that. So,
but importantly,
considerations.
He is a sub commander, so he does allow you to get closer to Magnificent or the Warlord formation. So, like if you're running a Maggot Lord, Festus, and him, that's 2 sub commanders and a character. So you've immediately got what you need for command entourage, which allows you to take an extra enhancement. So that's particularly good if you're running a Great and Clean one, because you can run the combo on him, and then the Great and Clean one you can run the Wither Stave. Yeah. So like there's the issue you've got is you run into points bleed, because you want to run like Orguts for the command point efficiency War Master, but then you can't give him an item because he's unique. But you run the Lord of Afflictions if he's your general and he's off the table, so you kind of need a War Master. But then if you run Rotigus, you can't give him the Wither Stave. If you run another demon hero, they're not resilient enough, or they're not going to be where they need to be. So you almost end up in this this dichotomy of choice where you go, I don't really know what the best formula is.
Got to give something up.
Which is why, and although we talked about, like, we see a lot of diversity in lists, I think, because you see
2/3 of the book is interchangeably used everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen drone lists. I think drones are kind of underrated, especially as more infantry becomes prevalent. I think they'll become better.
I love my drones.
Yeah, I ran.
The shooting shot has really surprised.
The shooting's great, and it allows you to enact disease on 2 units rather than 1. You shoot one, charge the other, Then you've diseased both units. They're demons, so you can benefit from the Sloppity mortal wounds. You've got the ability to drop from the sky as well. The only issue with them, they can't have a pre-game move. Unfortunately, it'd be nice if they had that in Droning Guard. They get a -1 a hit, but it's very rarely relevant. I would say that, like, Pascal Blightlords edge it out over drones due to meta at the moment, but if the meta shifts to infantry, then maybe the drones become a bit more prevalent. They're not as resilient.
Or maybe just see one unit of them popping up more. You barely see them currently. I've run 2 and I've run 1 unit, and I've summoned them as well, actually, in heavy summoning lists.
I ran two frees and I summoned a unit in one of my games, so technically I had 9 in one game. Just because I like them and I've got them painted. I didn't have the Pascals painted. I actually think Blight Kings are one of those units that should be run more, and that might increase the stock on the Lord of Plagues because of his synergy with them, and maybe Gut Rot. The issue with Gut Rot, he's very expensive, and you only get a kind of shit version of the Lord of Afflictions where you can come on, but it's from a table edge.
Yeah. I think maybe, obviously, you're going to end up with a very small elite army, but you might even see someone running it next to the Glockin or something, because getting a move in your opponent's turn with a slow unit that you want to get the value from, that makes a difference. Or maybe you see, one attempt at a reliable caster and bridge or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I ran bridge with Master of Magic. That was the combo, but I don't know if I would. I almost felt like it was too much effort to make the Plague Bearers relevant. I'd rather just not bother.
Agreed. Yeah, I've tested out.
So there are picks. Let us know if you agree, disagree. I'm sure you do. And then we've got talk about good matchups. So to be honest, pretty much anything that isn't super mobile with effective shooting. And there's an irony here coming with Deepkin, because actually, like, Deepkin hate resilient stuff, so it's kind of like it kind of balances out. But
you end up swinging a game.
Yeah, the games are quite close.
You really don't want to face Seraphon though, like monster heavy Seraphon with 24-inch range shooting.
Let's be honest, nobody wants to face Seraphon. Doesn't matter what army you've got, nobody wants to play against it because that book is broken. So
they get extra damage against
demons, but not against the mortals, right? So if you're taking Pascals, they don't. So that's another reason, like in the meta. So anyway, so mortal saves and healing. So because a lot of your damage comes from like disease points, and stuff like the belly flop from the Great and Clean One, or the mortals from Sloppity, and people who can heal, and I don't mean necessarily like heal wounds, but replace models, it mitigates that chip damage because you don't tend to go in and wowza kill a unit in one hit.
Yeah, or you just don't, like, normally you're used to feeling like you got the better half of things in a protracted grind. If someone else is, beating you at your own game, or they're putting models back or stuff like that, it feels pretty bad, actually. You're just so used to it, and you get kind of complacent with, oh, well, my dudes will arrive and I'll be there for longer than my opponent.
It'd be like your game when you played OBR and like it was just like handbags at dawn.
Oh, yeah, completely. Net, we removed like 11 models on the table over 5 turns of combat.
Or removed lots more, but they came back again, right? So,
yeah, they did. Like 300 wounds done.
So that's almost the bad matchups I've put on there. So because basically, like, you can pretty much play anything. Like
you turn up feeling like you've got game in pretty much, and we'll touch on scenarios immediately. But you feel like you've turned up with game against most stuff in the game.
You could add on there like very fast pointed combat damage.
Yeah.
But you've still got game against that, because if you spike your saves and they're sat in combat with you, then you're doing disease, you're getting your technique, you start grinding them, you start healing. So it's not a foregone conclusion.
No, the important thing playing with, if you're playing the slower variants of Nurgle, at least, let's say your average move is 4, 5, 6, something like that. If someone is able to shoot you at a decent quality and reliance with multiple units, especially so they can allocate perfectly from more than a move charge away, that move charge is the important thing. That is when things feel pretty bad. And that's when the army feels at its slowest.
Yeah, and it's why I don't particularly like Plague Bearers over the Pascals, because they're move 8, and like, they move
It's
4.
huge difference.
So like I've literally played games where I've sat on my objective opposite them, and there's no chance of them getting on my objective with a moving a long charge.
Between a unit using a 6 on its run 1 turn and going 14 versus going 10.
I mean, having like a unit of Reavers being able to shoot you with impunity with no chance of you charging them is like, because you've got movement 4, 12-inch charge.
Right.
You can't get 18-inch range. You're tough.
It adds up so much because let's say you've got the Puskulls over it, you can go 14 with a run on 1 turn, and then you've got an 8-inch move, so 22 plus your charge. So 22 plus your charge versus Plague Bearers of 10, 14, because they can't run on that turn and charge. It's a really, really big difference. That's basically the average difference in terms of the board size now, as well as your opponent's not come at you. So it's horrid.
So then also like we thought we put like we'll talk about scenarios. So obviously like tried to keep
Almost
this generic rather than talk
Yeah.
about like specific like Device or Apex or whatever, because they may be changing and may go away. But basically the important thing when you look at a scenario is does it have multiple spread objectives? So if you've got like 6 or like 5 that are spread out, it's really hard for you to have a presence in those places because of the speed of your army.
You can take up 2/3 of the board real well.
It is important to understand you don't need to, because a lot of them are hold 1, hold 2, hold more.
Yeah.
So you don't actually need to get all of them that are spread out. Obviously, there are some exceptions with burn missions and things like that. They're also super affected by the burn an objective into turn 3. So I think you almost want to be giving away free rather than being in most games.
You absolutely do, because if they burn this one and you're over here, you soz.
I played against a Nurgle army and there was 4, and he won the run, took the turn. He said, "Do you want to burn an objective?" And I said, "Well, no, because if I burn one, you'll head to the other one. Whereas if you head to one, I can just fuck off and go to the other one. So I'd rather keep them on the board because I know that it's slow for you." The other thing is deep, long deployments.
So either deploying longwise, or you might have like a diagonal one like this. That's horrible. And the multiplier on this is that if it's far away and small, you're way less likely to be able to get into their territory to get your extra summoning points, which really add up. 3 is a big difference.
And that's why like an LOA and a single guy is really good.
Yeah.
But it's like 330 points or whatever it is, so ridiculous.
It is.
So,
and your opponent might have a much more convenient army than you for being able to leave 2 units behind, one here, one there, where your dude came down, and you're not getting into that zone or whatever. So.
No. So yeah, you've got deep, long deployments can be a problem, especially against people who've got mobile shooting. And the other thing I'd say is small territory, because we talked about this already, your contagion points. If you're starting territory, your deployment's small, it's not half the table, you move out of it, you don't get your contagion. If they're small, they can easily zone that off, so you can't get in there.
Sometimes even the deployment's hard. You've got big bases.
Yeah.
So, you'll be like, well, if I want to tree here, which I do, then you end up under your own feet quite easily, especially if the terrain's big, which it can be.
Yeah, and that's just the issue I've seen with Horticulus, because he's super restrictive, because it's like wholly within 7 and 3 away from everything, so you almost need to like know exactly where you're not going to be to put that tree,
or you end up having to put him like
in a weird spot,
bottom corner,
and
he's not reaching anything for the game. He can get involved turn 4. Sweet.
And I've seen it, like I played against it and he couldn't place it. He literally couldn't place his tree, and he had to spend his next movement phase shuffling him into position where he could put it down.
In some scenarios, you might be better off just biting the bullet and being like, I'm not getting
I don't need
tree.
That one contagion.
4 points. It's 4 points
it's
over
4
the game.
Well, yeah, because he's lost turn 1 already. So it's like, you're...
How about I just get my 220 point dude there and
actually doing something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the irony is, you probably look at your summoning, you've always got like 1 or 2 extra a turn, and you don't actually need them all anyway.
Absolutely.
So, so I think that's the thing. But they are problematic for Nurgle. And you can mitigate it with list design with things like Nurglings, with Lord of Afflictions, with like stuff like that, because it allows you to. You can get Rot Spoon to an extent, but I don't put much stock in that.
Yeah, don't underestimate Nurglings, especially within the book. I think people they put down disease as reliably as anything else. They heal themselves. They always have a chance to overperform. People underallocate to them, and they give you flexibility. You don't have to commit 500 points of expensive stuff to get into a certain bit of the table. They can just babysit it for 2 turns.
I had a unit, basically just tank a unit of brutes.
That's great.
Just sit there. I don't care. You keep rolling dice at me and I'll just spike my saves, sit in cover.
When people do like 7 wounds and you're like, cool, net you killed 1 base because that one's healed now. Horrible for them.
Yeah. And they're good at stacking disease. You roll shitload of dice, so
15, yeah.
So ignore the fact there's IDNF on this, but sort of want to just summarize where we think they are in terms of like power, and like some of the sort of summary points really. So basically, we think they're like AS tier, even in an average player's hands. I'm not saying that that'll beat a good player using an AS tier list, but it might beat a good player with a B tier list.
You just got them chance. Spike saves done.
Yeah, you just roll more 5-ups, get a bit lucky on your saves, outlast. It's difficult.
You only need 10% more luck on your side and 10% less luck on your opponent's side, which is really that's going to happen frequently, and they could miss two of their strats, and then you're in the game, even if it was completely in their favor.
Yeah, and I think they're very forgiving, so that's probably why the skill doesn't matter as much. And they win late, generally.
Be prepared for 10, 4 or 5 victories.
You need to make sure your opponent's not slow playing, and you need to make sure you're playing your turns fast, because it does take time to do your admin.
And you're going to roll some dice as well. Here's my saves. Here's my after saves.
The way I do it, which is tips, I've got small green, very clear dice, and I don't I don't have pips that I tick up because that takes too long. I use them like counters. I literally have like these dice that I just pick up and put next to the unit. So if they've got 4 disease, there's 4 dice. Every time I do one, I just put another dice next to it.
Yeah.
Then at the end of the turn, I pick those dice up, roll them, put one back. It's a lot quicker than having a little thing with a dice that you tick up. Oh, I've got to find the fate. I've got to find the fate. And I've played against Nurgle a few times, and that alone takes way too long out of the game.
In multiple phases.
And you do it in the movement phase, you do it in the combat phase, you do it when you shoot, when you fight, you roll it in the battle shock. It's really important to get that mechanic fast. And whether or not you use like gems and then you just roll the dice from your dice pool, or you use small, I've got these very small, like 12 mil
bright
fluorescent vortex green Chessex ones, which are just, there's no symbols on them. They're just literally luminous green with black spots. Yeah. Really, really stand out. And you just put them next to the unit, pick them up, roll it, put one back. And then I've got a bag of them. I think I've got like 32. They come in a cube, and then like literally that's enough. And for me, that speeds up that process. Like all these little disease trackers with dice that you can't keep ticking the dice over. No, it's so easy to forget. Like literally, it's so much easier. I don't know if you agree, but I think it's really important to make sure.
I can definitely see it. I would end up with quite a lot of stuff on the table, given the list that I've been running. But if it's clear and obvious, then I think that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I mean, they're not that big, the dice. They're like not even a 20 mil base. So it's like there's always room near. I use gems for wounds as well, so
it's a very clear way to do it.
I don't like using dice. It's easy to.
If you're on stream, people would appreciate that. That's it's a very modern consideration. But if you're on stream, then someone watching knows exactly what's going on.
Cool. And it's visual. You can see the pile of green. The bigger the pile,
matter the reflection of light, or
So I think that's what I would do. But that's what I do, not what I would do. So just to explain this graph. So and I've put IDK on here as an example because we're going to do a show on them shortly, and I wanted to show the difference. So what I've got here is I've got this power up the side, and these are just arbitrary numbers. Like, don't worry too much. And then skill up to 10 on the bottom. Now, the idea, if all things being equal, skill of 1 would be a power of 1, skill of 2 would be a power of 2, and it'd be a straight line, because that's basically just showing that it's equal. So your skill is directly relatable to the power of the army.
What you put in, you get out.
With Nurgle, I think, and this is just my opinion, so it could be wrong, is that if you're a lower skill, you're going to get more out of the army than if you played one that's completely balanced in terms of skill and power.
Yeah.
And it's a shallow curve, but as your skill increases, it does increase with a small uptick at the end, putting it into quite a high band. If you're a very good player, Nurgle is still a very good army.
Especially once you found your list.
Yeah.
We said that there's a few scrolls that are a little bit underpowered, but the other 2/3 of the book is wide open. And I would encourage people to play the army until they've written a list for them that is theirs, that they feel covers all bases.
And conversely, what I would say with IDK is they're a very fragile army, and because of that, and you are dictating the game state most of the time because of your movement and your tides and your list building is super important.
My God, you care about priority as well.
And priority is very, very important. You don't care as much.
Yeah.
So your skill at lower levels is you're not going to be doing as well on average. I mean, obviously, you could win the key priority into high tide and just go first and delete them. But there's going to be games where they win the priority and they just kill you. So there's or they aggro you on turn 1 and kill you. So the skill of IDK, the better you get, the better it gets. I still don't think it's quite as powerful as Nurgle, because I think sustain is more important right now. And Nurgle are less worried about the turn roll, which is completely random. Whereas IDK care so much about that you could lose games on that roll. Like,
absolutely,
in one turn, you could lose your army because it's
your army
fragile.
doesn't. You can get saves, but your entire army doesn't rock up and just have saves by existing after saves, ward saves.
No, I mean you can design resilience in, but your resilience is around things that can be countered, or they're around certain turns. So 5-up ward on your Namati and High Tide, but as soon as High Tide drops, they just die in droves.
Yeah.
The turtle gives you resilience because it gives you cover. You've got resilience from shooting because they can't shoot they've got to shoot the closest thing. So if you've got something with a good armor save,
open your book and be a third more resilient, though, did you?
No, you didn't just get a 5-up every turn with healing. Yeah, you can put soul renders in so there's ways to mitigate it, but it's not. You're trying to get close to the Nurgle level, but never ever getting there.
You can't balance out bad luck if you're dead.
No.
Like a really important consideration. Oh, my great unclean one survived on 3 wounds. I left him exposed, but he survived. Cool. Now I can heal some wounds, and I can make that back the next turn.
I've had games where I leave a LOA on 1 wound, then he heals D3 in the hero phase.
Yeah.
He comes out of combat. He then wins the double. He then heroic actions in my go.
BD3.
Then he gets another D3 back, and you're just I just can't touch him now. He's gone back up to 7 wounds, got down to 1, and that's hard work.
I lost the thing that was capable of doing wounds to him.
And he's killed 2 units of Reavers or something, and then you go oh, I got Rotigus down to 1 wound. He's now retreated out of combat, healed back up. He's now back on 10, and it's just you just get to the point you just can't quite. And he's got 20 wounds as well. It's even harder. So I found that I did 18 to him. A normal Great Unclean would be dead.
Yep,
he wasn't. And it's that 1 or 2 wounds because he spiked his saves, and it really does add up. And even stuff like Plague Bearers, so I left 1 alive, then he killed off the thing that was fighting them. Then it's I'll rally them, 19 dice, I'll roll 4 6s. There's 5 Plague Bearers, cast Fleshy Abundance, and that's 15 wounds. You're just back to square one. Really, it feels like So
roll 1 on my Battle Shock. Feels good.
Yeah, that as well. That's another thing to think about. So, so basically the idea of that graph is to show you that as player skill increases, you're
Or
already
reps,
above
you
the
can read it
line.
as.
Yeah, but that's what I mean by
Practice.
skill. Like you get
Yes.
skill by practicing with the army or by being a
Absolutely.
good player and practice. So I think, depending on what way minded you are, whether you're just a good experienced gamer, or you're very methodical in what you do and can retain information, or you just have played 100 games with it, your skill will be better. Your skill will increase. It doesn't mean that you're never going to, if you're a skill-free player, you're never going to get to skill 8. You will, but it just might take you 50 games. It might take you 5 games. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that as your skill increases, you shallowly will get more wins with Nurgle. But if you're
You will. They're also less affected by meta changes.
Yeah, they are to a point. I think the book's not as flexible as others, but
the raw goods are there.
The rules innately are good because it's sustain, it's resilience. So, you're going to be able to have a game. Like you'd be very rare for a Nurgle army to be tabled in 2 turns.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you've done that, well done. But most people take 3 or 4 just to get, and you're winning on mission over the game rather than deleting their army. Whereas
absolutely.
I've played with my Deepkin many games where I can delete their army in 2 turns. I don't need to worry about the mission too much.
Yeah.
Kruleboyz is a good example. Absolutely like amazing matchup for Deepkin. Literally did not give any shits about playing against Kruleboyz.
Yeah, I can shoot one of my guys.
Enjoy. And you have to shoot that one because that's the one I gave you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to shoot all your guys at range and charge you and then delete you. And it's just like no chance. If you understand the armies, you dictate everything. They don't have much of a chance, really. I'm not saying they can't lose, just saying that it's it's a good matchup.
Absolutely. If you are interested in the Deepkin, you should check out our Deepkin version of one of these. I think that's a very interesting game, actually. Russ and I both feel like it's a hard matchup for both sides. So
I've lost to Nurgle once
or twice, I guess.
Once, I think.
Yeah.
And I've played them, I'll say 11 times with Deepkin. And every time it's been hard work.
Yeah, good game.
So, yeah.
Tiring.
I actually just think my opponent misplayed it most games.
Well,
so,
I mean, the difference between these two, right? Like, the Deepkin are harder to play. That you have more options. There's more places you could do the wrong thing. Whereas Nurgle is so slow that you just kind of get there.
Yeah. And I'll talk about that when I talk about Deepkin. The thing that causes Deepkin to have fits. I'm not going to tell people now. So I've got more tournaments under my belt yet. So, but that's our kind of overview of Nurgle.
Yeah.
Let us know if you like this format, if it's useful.
If you've got suggestions for things that should be included, like we want to bring in different dialects to this discussion, like quality of wounds or relative wounds, or like objective capturing power, stuff like that. So if there's a key aspect that we've not touched on that you think is really obvious, then please let us know, and we'll work it out and put it into our matrix of whatever. I don't know if we'll ever get to the state where we can be like, this is a 4 out of 10 here, of a 9 out of 10 here, and this out of 10 there. That requires some cooperation, but we will try.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be hard to have a load of different things that you measure and have like a radar diagram. We did it with the faction focus, but
yeah, it's rolling it all into it's weighting, isn't it? That's the difficult bit, which is
it's just a scale, isn't it? Yeah, well, it is. I know people could say we can get the data, but yeah, sure. But yeah, we'll talk about that a different way. But anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Do the algorithm stuff. Support us by buying templates and dice,
check out merch, templates and dice.
Yeah, and let us know what you think about the video. Also, go check out the Iron Gutsman's video and give him a support on his channel. But thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one where we're going to talk about IDK and how they're getting on from their release.
Nice.
Bye.
Bye, guys.